Right, a lot of guys wanted me to continue discussions on child support laws, so I'm going to go over a couple more of those. These ones coming from the 1990s. And before I get into the first one, real quick, this poll right here made me aware that guys aren't necessarily informed, or they don't necessarily understand fully why we have laws that enforce child support, but there's nothing out there that's enforcing child custody and visitation. If you want me to have that conversation and do that breakdown, I will. And I need to make a bit of an apology here. I just assume that for a lot of guys, especially those of us who have been through it, understand the connection between child support and child custody and visitation. If you want me to break that down as succinctly as I can, I'm definitely happy to do that. I just haven't covered it before because I assumed that it's pretty natural for guys to understand it. And again, I apologize for making that oversight. If you want me to see that video, please make sure you leave a comment and give my pinned comment a thumbs up. Give this video a thumb. Watch this one through its entirety. Let me know in some way that you want me to do that video, and I certainly will. Again, third apologies, it's the charm. I apologize for having made the assumption that a lot of guys already understand that. So let's talk about this law right here in child support. It's the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act, or UIFSA. I'm just going to call it the Act because I don't feel like saying that the entire time. So that's the one we've got going on. And this is the law that standardized interstate child support enforcement nationwide. Now, it didn't just close more loopholes. It locked families into a single controlling court, no matter where life took them. After Congress forced states to honor each other's orders, the next step was to make sure that every state enforced child support in the same basic way. And that's what this act did. It unified the rules and eliminated discretion across state lines. Originally introduced in 1992 and later revised in 1996 and 2008, this act requires every state to follow the same framework for interstate child support cases. It gives one state controlling and exclusive jurisdiction, meaning that parents generally cannot seek modification anywhere else unless specific legal conditions are met. By the early 1990s, child support enforcement had already become permanent, automated, criminalized, and nationally enforceable. Those are the ones that I covered previously. I'll leave images right up here if you want to find them in my library. But there was still another problem for policymakers: inconsistency. Different states handled interstate cases differently, and procedures varied. Modification standards varied. Enforcement tools varied. From the government's perspective, all of that created friction. So this act was supposed to be the solution. Its purpose was to create a single uniform system that every state had to use when dealing with interstate child support cases. And once adopted, it eliminated competing court orders and established one clear rule. One state has control, one jurisdiction, and that state keeps it. Now, under this act, the state that originally issued the child support order generally remains continuing and exclusive jurisdiction over that case. So that means if you move, if you work somewhere else or start a new life in another state, the original court still controls your support obligation. Other states are required to enforce the order and not to reevaluate it in any way. They just send it right back to your court, or that original court, I should say. Modification then becomes limited and often difficult unless a very specific condition is met. Now, for mothers, this act was sold as protection and consistency, as always. And it also meant that a father could not move and trigger a new legal process based on his changing economic circumstances. Now, this law worked in perfect alignment with the previous laws. Title 4D incentives, federal databases, automated payment withholdings for your paycheck, permanent arrears, national recognition and criminal enforcement. We're just tying more pieces together here. So at this point, every part of the system was speaking the same language. And the 1996 revisions strengthened to align with federal welfare reform. The 2008 revisions further connected interstate and international enforcement frameworks. Each revision further rooted the idea that child support obligations were permanent, portable, and enforced everywhere. But at no point did any of these revisions add meaningful mechanisms for reassessing fairness or feasibility. And the long-term result just added to the system that many men are experiencing, even today. One order, one jurisdiction, all of it enforced indefinitely. Now, this act did not create the system all by itself, but it did continue to standardize much of it. It ensured that no matter where you live in the United States, child support enforcement follows the same rigid structure. So while the Full Faith and Credit Act before this one made child support orders nationally enforceable, this act standardized how that enforcement works everywhere. Which brings us now to the next one. A few years later, in 1996, we got the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. Another long, stupid one. I'm just going to call this one the Act as well. Hopefully you don't confuse it with the previous one. But this is the welfare reform law that hardwired child support enforcement into federal funding, databases, new hire reporting, and permanent surveillance. After child support became permanent, automated, criminalized, and all of that good stuff, Congress then tied it directly to welfare reform. From this point forward, states did not just enforce child support. They were paid to impose it aggressively. The act was signed into law in 1996 by President Bill Clinton. Publicly, the law was sold as welfare reform. The messaging focused on personal responsibility and work requirements, and on reducing long-term dependency on government assistance. And we've seen how that's gone in the past 30 years, am I right? But structurally, it transformed child support enforcement into a central pillar of federal welfare policy. By 1996, the architecture was already in place. Title 4D created the funding incentive. Bradley Amendment made debts permanent. And then there were a couple of others that I've already covered. I'll put links for them down below as well. Now, what remained was a way to connect all of it into one national system. And that's what the 1996 Welfare Reform Act did. The law required states to meet specific child support enforcement benchmarks. Yes, you heard me right. Benchmarks to receive full federal reimbursement. Higher collections meant higher incentive payments to states. More enforcement actions meant more money. Child support was no longer simply about family court orders. It became a measurable revenue stream tied to federal compliance. And to make it possible, the law created major national databases. One was the Federal Case Registry, which centralized child support case information across states. The other was the National Directory of New Hires. And this one is a doozy. This one required employers to report new hires, rehires, and wage data so states could quickly locate parents and initiate wage withholding. So from that point forward, changing jobs no longer created a gap. The system updated automatically. They know where you are, when you were. So for these fathers, employment became a tracking event. Wage data became fuel for enforcement. Movement across state lines, even for employment, became irrelevant because the system followed automatically. This law also expanded administrative enforcement tools substantially. States gained broader authority to suspend driver's license, professional licenses, and recreational licenses. Tax refunds could be intercepted more efficiently. Bank accounts could be located or frozen. Administrative agencies gained more tools to enforce without relying entirely on ordinary court processes. And all of this occurred alongside permanent arrears under the Bradley Amendment, meaning enforcement intensified even when the debt itself was no longer realistic to repay. The key shift here is that child support enforcement stopped being reactive and became proactive. States no longer simply waited for non-payment. They anticipated income. They anticipated movement. So they used employment data. They coordinated across states. And because federal funding was tied to outcomes, there was no incentive to slow down and reassess what was actually happening to fathers and families. The long-term result is a national enforcement network that tracks employment, coordinates across states, and enforces financial obligations with very little concern for families. So let me know what surprises you most here. Maybe you're already familiar with some of it, but do give me your thoughts. And as I mentioned, I'm happy to do a dive into why these types of laws are enforced with rigor, but there's nothing being done about visitation and custody. I'm happy to do that. Please, guys, as I always say, be careful out there. I'll see you soon.